Next, we have Chris Bradt, who is going to be talking on California Energy Code and the grid, navigating the political landscape. And Chris has been instrumental in guiding the implementation of water and energy efficiency programs for Sonoma County, ABAG, and Los Angeles County. His expertise spans residential retrofit programs, energy efficiency financing, building codes and standards, energy efficiency and water conservation policy. As program manager for the Sonoma County Regional Climate Protection Authority's Efficiency Pays On-Bill Financing Program and the BayREN Codes and Standard Program, he oversees program implementation activities, including contract budget and management. Recent projects include strategy development and technical assistance for the BayREN and Tri-County REN business plans and compliance filings. Great job, Chris.
Good morning. How's everyone doing? We're going quickly, so hopefully I can keep that up. Deborah, thank you. My name's Chris. I've been working with BayREN for 5 years now, maybe, since we've put it in the initial program implementation filing in 2012. Before that, I've had the honor of working with the Bay Area local governments as part of the ARA recovery funding, some of the efforts in 2010. And that was really when I first also started getting involved in energy efficiency. Before that, I was working in solar when I first came out here to California. And then before that, I was a teacher, 8th grade U.S. history. So I'm going to steal a page from Cordell's book and provide a little bit of some personal background as to why this is important to me. But just thinking about this overall as this question of the grid and why it might be political, I think it's a question of anything that we do as humans gets political. And the idea of the electrical grid, and if you want to extend that to the natural gas infrastructure that provides us with what we do here, we are in a pretty interesting time. Things are changing faster than we can really even keep up with. It's a dynamic process. Things are very complicated, and I think we're all really invested in the outcome. But that means that there's a lot of great cooks in the kitchen, and I'm hoping that we're going to work on something that tastes good in the end here. I think the other thing that I wanted to just invite in this conversation is not only an understanding of how dynamic and complicated this all is, but also just that, you know, BayREN is here to help. I think, as Jenny was describing, there's a sense of collaboration, a sense of kind of sharing that happens in this room and happens in a lot of the other work that BayREN tries to bring to the table. And we want to know more about the ways that we can help engage in this process. There is a lot going on, and not everyone can participate in every workshop and every hearing, but what can BayREN help to do to synthesize some of this, bring messages to you, and also bring messages back to these types of conversations happening here in San Francisco at the Public Utilities Commission, up in Sacramento at the Energy Commission, and in all the other places that we are coming together for this. But I wanted to start with my story a little bit, because when you grow up in Ackworth, New Hampshire, and you live in a house built in 1865 with no insulation, you use a lot of wood to heat your home. And so I had a really intense understanding of what it meant to have energy, because we started stacking wood in April and we finished stacking wood in September. And then we put the wood on a sled in December and brought it into the house and heated the home. You really appreciate your energy when it heats you up 3 or 4 times, from stacking it to bringing it back in the house, building the fire, and then cleaning out the ashes. But I also live in a very different place. It was really green. You know, this was downtown South Ackworth. So it's very different compared to Oakland, where I live now. That's the same scale, and there's a lot more homes around us. But it's also, I think, important, and I had this picture of Robin Williams, not only because it was the cover of Time magazine on March 12, 1979, when I was born, but he's also not from here, and neither am I. But I am now, but I live in a household with many people who are also not from here. That's my wife and daughter. Her parents came from Nicaragua. They arrived here in the 70s. Esther is now going to be 70 this year. She doesn't want to be cold. She needs light to make sure that she can read and watch her telenovelas. this is a very real kind of need about what the grid does for her. I want my daughter to be able to shower. I want my daughter to be able to have energy and electricity when she is 16, 17. I want the grid to be as dependable for her as it is for us now. And our home is able to do very different things in the house that I grew up in back in New Hampshire. We put insulation in the walls with Energy Upgrade California. We've got, can't really see it, but a really nice southwest exposure. So we're going to be putting solar on our roof as we get our re-roofing done this year. And I think it's all these types of questions that kind of come together and help us understand kind of how we interact with this grid. I remember when I was driving to Boston when I was really little, I was trying to figure out, how do all these people get all the firewood in their home? Now I understand it's a different type of firewood. But I think the question about what our grid is doing for us, you know, we are paying for this really huge infrastructure. And I think sometimes it's easy for us to forget that. But when you think about California itself, California is its own electrical grid. That's a system of distribution and transmission. That's generation and programs like energy efficiency and low-income programs. And it's really meant to make sure that we have reliable electric service for everybody. There's an equity question here. There is a question about long-term investments. There's a question about how do we fund these types of multi-billion-dollar improvements and investments, and how do we do that in a fair way so that if we make a pivot in the Bay Area, or if Los Angeles makes a pivot to CCAs and more kind of local generation sources or strategies, what does that mean for places that aren't pursuing those types of paths and are left on the old grid and the old power contracts? It's not easy, and yet we also have these desires that our grid is resilient going forward. We're facing climate change, disasters, natural or man-made, and the new markets and the innovation that's kind of coming in and disrupting all of this means that as we look at this intersection of where energy code and the grid is all coming together, this isn't to scale, by the way, and it's not intended to be the entire ecosystem, but it is a complicated space. And I think we also don't want to lose sight of the customers. I put customers in this because we're talking about grid. That's also constituents. Those are voters. Those are the people who need to live in this place, but probably don't really care as much about the stuff that's happening in this room, the conversations that are going on in Sacramento and in the Utilities Commission. They just want to flip the switch and have it work. They have, my mother-in-law has desires to have this all work in a way which means that she doesn't really have to think about it. That means that we all who are more in tune to this environment have to think a lot about it. And we have to find times to interact with the regulators. I have been just fascinated by listening to the 2019 code adoption process and the amount of time and effort that's dedicated to soliciting stakeholder feedback and industry comment, and yet how hard it is to get stakeholders to come to the table. It's a lot of time that's invested there. And not everyone sees the immediate benefit, but at the same time, this is a conversation, this is about 2019. This is 3 years off, and already they're starting to think about 2022 code updates. This is not gonna stop, and it's something that we need to figure out ways to be involved in. Because the change is already here. As I looked at solar 5, 6 years ago, when I first came out to California, I was helping to do a lot of solar education programs. Solar then was $10 a watt, depending upon what you're doing with different incentives or your manufacturers. The solar panels that we're getting spec'd for our home right now are $4 a watt. Probably spending a little bit too much on it, but they're made in the United States. They're done by Peterson and Dean. Not plugging them, but they helped me get 3% 12-year money. You know, I was like, all right, that works. After the federal income tax credit, that's like $270 per watt. That is something, that's an investment that I'm willing to make in our house. Talking about electric vehicles and the type of work that's happening in Sonoma and around the state, people are making these decisions more and more to make these types of purchases. I was looking at some information about automobile purchases in California in the first quarter, and 4.8% of cars purchased in California, January through March, were either a zero-emission vehicle, an electric vehicle, or a plug-in hybrid. California's car market's about 2 million cars a year. That's 50,000 cars over the course of the year if that kind of adoption rate keeps up. Some of them might be in Sonoma. They're going to be around the state, though. And what type of infrastructure does that support in terms of those batteries on wheels? We know how quickly things are changing in terms of connectivity, the Internet of Things, and the ability to program your thermostat from your phone while you're sitting here because you forgot to lower it or you want to make it cooler by the time you get home. It's going to be about, 85 degrees out here in October in San Francisco. I mean, these types of, changing environmental pressures, it's nice to be able to dial it up or dial it down remotely. And CCAs, I mean, many of us know what they are, many of us know that they're coming, but when you think about the numbers, there's about 1 million CCA customers today. There's about 15 million CCA or residents in communities that are considering CCAs actively. That is a huge portion of our electrical demand, going from very centralized, regulated procurement to more decentralized procurements, some of which are regulated and some of which we're figuring out ways to regulate them. And that's a complicated question. Was really appreciating some of the things I was seeing on the CPUC's website. Not always easy to navigate, but a lot of awesome. And this kind of quote, I don't need to read the whole thing, but we can't do this in California. And in terms of a coherent plan moving forward, think about what's going to be necessary to do this at a national level. I mean, we need to lead, but we also need to lead in a way which is informed. This en banc triggered 21 different rate setting proceedings at the CPUC. Rory, I'm not jealous of your guys, of the ecosystem you're working in. I'm hopefully not stealing too much of your presentation either, but just the complexity behind each of these. By the way, A stands for application in any of those numbers. R stands for rulemaking. I don't think we have any D's up there, but those are your decisions. Each one of these is like an ecosystem into itself. And to know which of these to follow, to know what of these is kind of most relevant to your issue, as well as to kind of the grid in general, again, it's complicated. And yet I hear a lot of discussion about, well, it's really easier, isn't it? Or we don't buy the numbers that we're hearing from some of these formal proceedings where a lot of people are coming together and providing input. We don't think buildings should be regulated because, quite frankly, it's the big PV farms that the IOUs are putting out in the desert that are creating the problem. It's a yes, but kind of statement, right? There is a lot that is happening that is beyond the control of any one resident, any one building owner, any one local government, because so much of this solar, the blue line, is done at kind of total statewide capacity. The delta there is where things are kind of being done by PG&E or Southern California Edison in terms of their procurements. But if you look at the red line and the blue line and the green line below, that's the built environment. That's our ability to help impact this and make it more reliable and do what we can in this space of the built environment. What does that mean? What is the goal as we look to that built environment? 2019 was a goal for residential new construction of Z&E. There are realities that this code update is running into based upon what the market is able to do, what it's prepared for, really what the grid can support currently, and how all of that pencils from a cost effectiveness perspective. That question, getting back to reliability and equity, we can't mandate costs in a way that people can't meet them, but we can help by coming to the table, thinking about different incentives, thinking about different ways to raise capital or funding, and figuring out what is the best way to amortize those costs. Utilities amortize their costs over 20, 30 years. and then pass that on to rates. Are there ways from an on-bill model perspective or different types of utility services that could help spread costs that a homeowner has to kind of meet to make their property go to Z&E? Is that a fair strategy? I don't pretend that I have the answers, but I think there are a lot of big brains in this room and contributing to these conversations where if we bring all those perspectives to the table, we can try to figure that out. And yet in that process of coming together, there's a lot of time and effort, again, that's necessary. Looking at some of this is the express terms. This is language that was just been kind of, I think comments probably could still be put in. Comments theoretically on these express terms were due last Friday. But this is kind of the beginning part of taking a lot of analysis, a lot of studies done by the IOUs, by different types of industry groups to inform how the code will be updated. And some big changes that are kind of really relevant to this conversation, the concept of the energy design rating and really trying to move the needle to help get as efficient as possible, bring as much cost-effective generation as possible, while at the same time still working within the confines of the grid, cost effectiveness, but also giving local governments a tool to go farther. So this concept of an energy design rating is not entirely different. It's based off of the HERS system, home energy rating system, but they're going to be setting more specific targets, and that's going to be based upon your total energy design rating, which is your energy efficiency design rating plus your solar and demand flexibility design rating put together to give you this goal of what is your building going to be needing in terms of energy load. Then the question becomes, what can a local government do to maybe ratchet that down a little bit and make buildings even more efficient? This is totally stolen from one of the presentations or a couple of the presentations at the CEC. This is, we could geek out on this for a while, I think. But I also appreciate the way that this was kind of put together with the concept of, are these systems, is this PV with backup storage cool, not cool? Is it helping us get to our goal? And if you, so, I mean, we're climate zone 2 and 3. When you look at the potential size solar system to balance our annual kWh of an average home versus what's necessary to kind of offset total site energy, and looking at natural gas, looking at a system that is too large to be really contributing benefit to the grid, what's necessary to get it to something that's a little bit more balanced, something that has battery backup, something that has these new devices, two-way communicating, grid-connected systems with inverters. The logic flow here from going from a medium-sized system to a big system that, as they say, is not cool. What does it take to get to something that is cool? And what costs are associated with that? And how can different places get there faster? There's going to be different appetites for what is cost-effective in different places. I'm going to stop there with this one because we could talk about this for a long time, or I could. It might be boring to other people. But the question is also, is it good to do this on an individual's home? Does a homeowner want to become their own little utility? Are there other alternatives? We spent a lot of time batting back and forth, a lot of comments on this section here about community solar and community storage systems. What is also the responsibility of a local jurisdiction, a bunch of building inspectors, to go out and also be policing community solar systems? What are even, large, medium-sized power plants, if you will? This just begins to touch on some of the complicating factors here. It's not only about enabling language, but it's also about enforcing it and making sure our building departments and us as planners and people who are interested in sustainability can participate in this conversation. And so why do we need to care? The California energy crisis, that was a thing. I wasn't here then, but some of you might have been. And that billions and billions of dollars were spent to have that happen, and then were the consequence of that experiment, if you will. We know what climate change is, but I also, having taught history, and I'll close with this, I guess, in that one of the things that motivated me to get into clean energy was the fact that when I was teaching 8th graders in Florida, I was like, it's your responsibility to go out and change the world, you know. And then we moved to California, and I was like, okay, they're doing a lot of stuff out here. Let's see what this is all about. But in teaching history, I also recognize that we've been piggybacking on technology that's over 100 years old now. The combustible engine, the grid, the way power has been generated. I mean, there have been incremental changes, but ultimately, this is old technology. It really helped us become what we became as a country. And to me, the opportunity is one where, yes, you can talk about it in the idea of let's not be underwater. You could talk about it in the idea of let's have a reliable grid. But ultimately, to me, the biggest driver is this is where next generation energy is going. And it's what we can be part of, if we want to be, to really be an economic driver into the next century. Because if we don't do it, somebody else is, and they're already trying to get ahead of us. So California can lead, and to me, that's what's exciting about all this. So wanted to leave you with a snapshot of resources between the work that's happening at BayREN. The statewide IOU team has put together a great new website with a lot of information about local ordinances. The Title 24 proceedings are ongoing. They're in the pre-rulemaking stage right now. The California Energy Efficiency Coordinating Committee, a bad way of spelling cake, is helping to facilitate the kind of at least the rolling portfolio process, but also helping to bring in a lot of different programs outside of just energy efficiency. I took my pick of 5 proceedings at the CPUC that I thought were most relevant. You could probably name others. And then I really appreciate just the network that we work with. When I first started in energy, I was working with Community Energy Services Corporation in Berkeley. Rachel DeFranco was someone who I got to know there. And she sent me a link that they've been working on at East Bay Energy Watch on a landscape of energy efficiency programs in the East Bay. You could probably have this translate to many other parts of the Bay Area as well, but just helping to understand the many different players in this space. That's what I was trying to do today, to just encourage everyone to be more engaged in this. And if there are any ideas that you have for how BayREN can help in that, myself, Jenny Berg, Jerry Lahr, any of your county reps, I think want to hear that as well. So thank you very much, and we'll pass it along. Kelly, right? Oh, yeah, Roy.
Thanks for telling everybody all about our proceedings. I think you know more about what we're doing than I do, and I work there. The community solar piece is kind of learning it's sort of a tough nut to crack, and we have been in touch with a production builder near Fresno who are developing a 35 or so home Z&E neighborhood greenfield that they're going to start construction this year. The original plan was to put a community solar facility in that neighborhood, and it was kind of like a perfect opportunity. It's just one discrete project, and they own the property. They can put community solar there if they want to, and they decided not to after they said they were going to. And they just said it didn't really pencil out for them. The value of the property is much better to put a house on it than it is to put solar panels on it, and they're going to put solar on all the roofs anyway. So, why bother? So I just wanted to sort of point that out as being as much as we like talking about community solar, doing it even when somebody was a willing partner is turning out to be a little bit more difficult than we were anticipating.
Yeah. No, and I think that's the economics, and especially depending upon where you are, that land is going to even be more valuable. And the rooftops are ideal space, but I think there's also questions about if we're looking to build this capacity, what is the way in which that can be done in the most predictable manner possible? And I think that a larger system gives you a little bit more control over that, but there needs to be, if that's the push that we're trying to go in, or if that is a policy decision that gets made, there needs to be appropriate economic valuing of what that can do compared to a bunch of 35 separate systems. So, yes.
Just to pick up on that comment, I think the cogent part is the fact that a vast majority of existing homeowners don't have access to solar. New construction, new access, no trees, put on the roof. But what we're talking about is getting those mechanisms in place for the 60 to 70% of people who cannot put solar on their roof. And that's why community solar is so critical. And that's what the missing piece in California is now.
Willing to bet, I don't want to steal Kelly's topics, but you might be talking about some of that kind of stuff. So with that, I'll turn it over to Deborah. Yeah, thank you.